Laura Meyer, founder and CEO of Amazon solutions provider Envision Horizon.
And I'm Todd Pachowski, Director of Performance Marketing at Envision Horizons. We've teamed up to make the Common Mistakes podcast.
Todd and I meet with business owners, leaders, and investors to discuss common mistakes and other business experiences they've learned from. Tune in every other Tuesday for your dose of business advice. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Common Mistakes, where we talk about mistakes we've seen, we've made ourselves, so you don't have to learn the hard way. I'm Laura Meyer.
And I'm Todd Pachowski. Today we have a very special episode, as they all are. We have Michael Erickson Facchin.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. On the show, he is the founder and CEO of AdBadger, an Amazon ad automation software. He also puts out a ton of content, a content producing machine. He puts on an amazing Amazon PPC podcast, the very first one on Amazon PPC. I think that's true. I'm not 100% on that, but one I've definitely listened to since the beginning. It's probably also a bit creepy, but I consider him a friend since he's accompanied me on many morning walks with my dog.
Hey, right on.
Yeah, Michael is known for his tagline, I got 99 problems, but PPC ain't one. Michael, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for the great intro. Yeah, it's great to be here. What kind of dog do you have, Todd?
I've got a big black mutt. She's her name is Amarillo. She was found on the streets of Amarillo, Texas, and I thought she was going to be 30 to 40 pounds, and she's part Great Dane, so she's very big.
Oh, right on. Very cool.
So I totally misinterpreted that. I thought you guys have actually gone on walks together, and I had some FOMO for a second, and then I put together it's you listening to the podcast.
No, it has to be weird. I mean, I really enjoy your content, and I consume it all the time. And I feel like, and that has to be weird for you, but I know you fairly well from that content, at least what you put out there. So I assume that's strange.
You know, people tell me like, oh, I was on a road trip from New York to California, and I listened to like 50 episodes. So yeah, I mean, I'm always blown away that smart, talented people tune into the show, and I'll keep making them if people keep listening, for sure.
Awesome. We'll definitely give it a listen or a follow. But today we're going to open it up with my favorite question. Michael has been given a heads up on this. But if you can share one of the biggest mistakes you've made that you're so grateful for today because you learned so much in the process, I think that's a great way to kick off today's conversation.
Yeah. You know, when you asked this right before we hit record, I was thinking, and I was like, oh man. But really, I think the hardest thing I've ever done professionally is sort of based off a mistake of sort of underestimating how tricky and difficult it is to start a software company, as well as Amazon advertising specifically. You know, before starting AdBadger, I founded a small sort of boutique PPC for e-commerce agency. And, you know, we were doing it as a service, and we were using like Google Ads tools and Facebook Ads tools. But for Amazon ads, I was like, you know, I feel like there's not a thing that I would want to use. Like, it seems like I want a tool that's made for like the real practitioner who's like doing PPC every day. And I was like, oh, well, this is easy. I'll just start a Amazon advertising software company. And easier said than done. Yeah. So I think underestimating how tricky it was, I would have talked to a lot more people ahead of time. I would have budgeted a little bit better. A lot of different things there.
On the budgeting piece, I actually don't know this. Did you take external funding, or have you done this bootstrap? Like, what's been that financial journey?
Yeah, originally when I started it, I was like, we'll do it bootstrapped. You know, we had an agency wing that was profitable. So we're like, oh, we'll just take a little bit from there. That little bit ended up being a lot more than I think I had expected. And then eventually we took on some external funding as well. So we took AdBadger through a startup accelerator, toured the country and pitched investors and did a small seed round. Nothing too crazy, in the ballpark of, about 400K.
Awesome. And did you enjoy that process, or is that something you hope to never have to do again?
Never do again. I think trying to raise money is awful. I'm trying to think of the worst word I can think of. Yeah, it's pretty brutal. So I think going through an accelerator is awesome for, I live in Austin normally, but I went to an accelerator in Cincinnati, Brandery, and it was awesome. Like they had incredible resources, incredible people for me to talk to, and like it created a really nice environment for me to get my best work done. And they tell you on the first day, like, hey, if you can pace at 20% month over month growth throughout this accelerator, when it comes time for you to raise money, it'll be a cakewalk. And of course, growing 20% month over month is exhausting in and of itself. And then on top of it, to then basically take on another full-time job, which is trying to raise money, working super long hours on the company. And then you're also trying to be master networker, talk to people about the growth trajectory that you're on and convincing them to invest. So it's a ton of work.
Yeah, I imagine so. You've made it through and you have a
I think
wonderful
so.
software. Yeah, I mean, Ad Badger, we don't personally use it at the agency. We have some internal tooling, but the trials and kind of screenshots and things that I've seen, there's a lot of great features. Can we dive into, this isn't the, call out for your tool, but just what features or options do you see customers or clients using very often that is most useful, and vice versa? What are they not using that they should be using?
Yeah, I think one of the most valuable things that our tool reflects is being able to do whatever you want to do quicker, easier, faster. So, one thing that sort of frustrates me about digital marketing tools, especially in like the Amazon space, sometimes it always sort of assumes that every business should be operated the exact same way, that everyone has sort of the exact same product, the exact same setup, same amount of SKUs, like all of these things should be exactly the same, almost down to like a cookie cutter component. And what I'm super proud of at Ad Badger is that no matter what the person's setup in terms of campaign structure or SKU breakdown, or if it's a KDP person or not, or anything like that, we've configured the software in a way that it is infinitely customizable. So if someone wants to, take an auto campaign and then send it out to just phrase match somewhere else, or just a broad match somewhere else, or all or exact somewhere else, or all three, or none of the above, or do something completely different, or use single keyword campaigns, or use smaller groups of keywords, and you want good keyword movement tools, being able to sort of do exactly what you want, visualize your own strategy is super helpful. And of course, we have like the standard track for people that maybe don't know exactly what their strategy should be. But I think having the option to be able to say like, hey, like you can turn on bid optimization, or you can do it like 50-50. You can do some manual work for your bids, and you can do automation half the time. So like, or you can like turn on automation and influence it yourself. Nudge it in one direction or the other, or set up guide rails for where you actually want it to go. Like those things I'm super duper proud of inside of our tool.
Yeah, there's like having that flexibility. And I find that when we've looked at tools, there's never that right fit. Like things that, we want to do, we're not able to do, things that we wish were there. And that's kind of why we resorted to building internally.
For
But
sure. Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, I think every agency, I saw a quote one time that said like every company is a software company. They just don't know it yet. So, I mean, even if you didn't develop your own software, I'm sure you'd be using lots of third-party tools, like just everything. And when you visualize all the things that you're using, it's like, oh, like we could potentially have our own software ourselves and like get it exactly the way that we want, which is awesome. Like I think that's true for any company, even outside of the e-commerce space.
Now, you had shared that you were prepared to share a lot of clients' mistakes that you've seen. And I feel like this is just Pandora's box here, because we could probably talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
But I want to dig into that.
Yeah. I think the biggest, most insidious thing that I see when I talk to a lot of people in the Amazon space, and this happens a lot to like super savvy entrepreneurs who are digging and they're looking for like the very best way to do something. And then they'll find some blog post or find something that gives them like such strict rules of every campaign needs to be configured this exact way. Every single match type needs to be configured this way, or very hard and fast guidelines. Like your ACOS should be exactly this number. Your total ACOS should be exactly this number. And then I will talk to them and they don't have an understanding of like why things work and why things don't work. So I think the biggest thing that I always sort of talk about is there's a lot of like confirmation bias where the person creating the content thinks it worked because of something they did, and potentially it's something outside of their control or something they're unaware of, or sort of survivorship bias of like, oh, they did it this way, they had a great result, it's because they did something a particular way. So if you take something like Amazon advertising campaign structure, for example, it differs a lot if you have, 5 SKUs versus 500 versus 5,000. Like that's completely different setup in the way that you need to configure that. And if someone's just following like a paint by numbers approach, they're going to have a really hard time because the pieces will not connect. Like, hey, I'm reading this blog post about how to structure a campaign. I have 5,000 ASINs. Why can't I get it to work the way that I want to? I've ran out of campaigns. I've ran out of my campaign limit for my account. So like really understanding like why the numbers do what they do, and then being able to sort of think about that and sort of adjust it to exactly their setup. I think that's like the most insidious thing where people they want to oversimplify it. And because of that, they miss a lot of the like how things work because they're sort of just like copying, pasting these things. And, someone like who has a podcast, it's very difficult to sort of be able to talk about things without a ton of, and, Todd, if you listen, you'll hear me do it a lot. I often do like a lot of caveats, like, oh, this might work in certain cases, but it might not work in other cases. And, your mileage may vary and all those things. So I think that is like one of my big principles for sure.
Yeah, Michael told me to do it. So why is it not working?
Yes, I've tried to be very anti that.
That's super hard because there are so many different scenarios. You can do different things for different cases. So it's hard to say in a strict manner, this is what you need to do to run advertising correctly. So,
for sure. There's an infinite number of variables why anything would work. Maybe something is highly brandable. Maybe something is totally commoditized. Maybe something is brand new and there's no search volume for it yet. Like all of those conditions can happen, and it makes it really difficult to put everything in a tight box.
Yeah, for sure.
So to get into or dive into some of the mistakes a little bit more, I always like discussing budget. You see brands limiting themselves by thinking that they just have to have this one ACOS number and that's their strategy. What are some best practices you can maybe share with our listeners when you're a new brand, or maybe you've had an existing business, but you really haven't given Amazon advertising love? What would be the process you would share in going about setting those goals and building that budget?
Yeah, so it definitely is dependent on the life cycle of the company, right? So if someone's brand new and they're just launching for the very first time and they don't have any other sales to gauge from, because most often people are setting advertising budgets as a percentage of their total sales, right? A total ACOS or an ad cost of total sales. And that number is usually around 10%. And obviously, so like if someone's doing 100,000 a month on Amazon, they will set an advertising budget of about $10,000 a month. With that said, there's lots of reasons why it might be higher or lower. I think the 10% number is the most popular number, but I think that there could be plenty of reasons to be above and below that. So for example, if someone's sort of trying to step on the gas and really accelerate their growth, then maybe that budget to total Amazon sales goes up to maybe 12, 13, or 14%. Or maybe if someone's in a sort of cost-cutting mode and they want to sort of pare down, maybe they might look at a 8 or 9% total ACOS number. So I think that's generally some insight in terms of like, what are our goals? What's the life cycle of the company? Where should we land on budget as a percentage of total sales? I think that's generally a smart way to do it. And with all that said, there's also like per product, you can do that per product as well. So sometimes this might come down to different product lines. Sometimes there might be a total ACOS goal per product. which I think is a sort of a recent recommendation, especially as CPCs go up. Instead, sort of spend per product can give you a little bit more refinement in terms of like maximizing profitability on product A and maybe pushing for visibility on product B. So I think that's a trend that will become more popular.
Yeah. So let me ask you, what is your favorite Amazon ad product and why? Because I know you
Yeah.
know what mine is.
Yeah, I think for me, just the classic actual product ad. So like a straight up sponsored product, keyword targeting, it's like plain white bread at this point. But I think the simplicity of it, the way that it looks just like a normal organic listing, the way that it converts, it's just I love it. I always consider like I always like to start there, right? And then work our way up the funnel. So I think that's like a strong foundation.
What about any of the new features? Let's go new, just because, in the last year or two, I do this for a living and I can't even keep track.
Yeah.
Anything new that's maybe underutilized?
I'm still surprised at how rudimentary a lot of people's sponsored brand video game, their skills at video, because I think it's so potent and for so many people it works so well. So I think getting a little bit more nuance, like a lot of times I'll see it and it's just like very, very tiny. There's like normally only one sponsored brand video campaign. It's like a very tiny set of keywords even. And it just seems like sort of like tepid campaign. And I feel like you could really go hard with your sponsored brand video. So I think like over the last year, 2 years, like that's probably the best new kid on the block. What are your guys' thoughts on sponsored display? Is it everything you hoped for?
No.
Yeah, there you go. Done. Yeah, pretty disappointing, huh?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where, our Amazon ad reps always want us to spend more there. It seems like there's some initiative internally to increase spend.
Yes, it does seem like there's some kind of internal initiative. Yes.
I'm fully convinced.
Mhm.
And look, we would do it if there was a better return, but we don't even create sponsored display for products unless they're a top seller to begin with, or it's a product that's really aggressive in wanting to gain market share. But we have struggled to really see the type of return that we then want to deliver to our clients.
Yeah, I often say like, in that example of an account that spends like 10 grand a month on their ads, maybe it's like 500 or 1,000 on sponsored display. So it's normally like a pretty tiny campaign, usually with like the surest bets that we can possibly make for sure. So that's how I sort of think about sponsored display.
Yeah, I think the last poll I did, we were like 4% or something of our campaigns like
Yeah,
being allocated towards display. So
for sure. Yeah.
I mean, what we'll do sometimes is we'll use it as a starting point for DSP if a
Mhm.
brand is kind of hesitant. But that said, we always see much stronger ROI or ROAS on DSP than we do sponsored display, even though they now have this crossover of functionality.
Yeah. I think there's a reason why, DSP isn't totally self-service, like a, random Amazon company on Amazon can't just go to DSP. Like there's a sort of a process that you have to go through in order to get there. And I think generally like because of those roadblocks, by the time that a company like gets to DSP, they understand what they're in store for and they have a better sense of like, oh, these are going to be sort of different than sponsored products. I'm not going to expect the same ROI as like a branded sponsored product campaign. And I think, there's lots of value to DSP as long as you go in with the right mindset and sort of the right goals. I mean, I've met people that spend just as much on DSP as they do sort of the normal core products.
Those clients, what's their makeup? Like, are they like what type of categories are they typically selling in? Like, I'll share from our side. We love DSP, especially for consumables where there's a high repurchase rate.
Yeah.
But we've also had success with DSP for luxury priced items where you have to hit them multiple times because they're a high price point item.
Yeah, like or like super premium products. Like I don't know their account. I'm not inside their account. I imagine like the category of products that I normally see is like the Yeti cooler. Like generally like if someone's selling something where it's like the normal one is like $20 but theirs is like 80 and like super premium, then like, oh okay, like that takes time to tell that brand story, and like that's why it makes so much sense for DSP, and their margins are phenomenal, so they have more time and resources to be able to go that extra mile. So like those kinds of brands generally crush it.
I'd love to pick your brains for a second on trends and benchmarks. And I know we don't like putting out these things and nobody should follow this exactly, but do you have any good benchmarks we can throw out there for, what's a proper tacos look like these days? Where are CPCs? We know they're growing. I know those are very broad questions, but any sort of high level benchmarks you want to put out there for the audience?
I just saw an account yesterday that was in like 2017. They were spending like 25,000 and all their clicks were like 7 cents. And then you just sort of like go to the ad console and you go to view all time, lifetime, and then you like chart CPC, and it went from like 7 cents to like 75 cents. That's gigantic. That's like 10x where they have been. The other component of that too, I like to mention, is like 75 cents is considered like cheap for a lot of people. But where this company, it's like, this is 10 times what I'm normally paying. So I just sort of share that as like how wildly different it can be, like per product, per category. So, I mean, just talking trend, like the trend is that CPCs are just continuing to skyrocket. And that's where like seeing like eating up people's profitability, which is why we started doing a lot more like per product analysis. Like for a long time, we were not doing per product total ACoS reporting because it's really tricky to do. And it's kind of like total ACoS minus sponsored brands. I think eventually we will get that information for sponsored brands, but it's sort of like total ACoS per product minus sponsored brands. So you get some kind of sense about how much you're spending on a product relative to its total revenue. And I think that's been an activity that we've done to help combat some of these rising CPCs.
Now, what's your opinion on buying your own branded terms? Defense, is it worth it? Should you be investing more in generic because it's an incremental audience? What are your thoughts there? And do you see, like some common mistakes I've called out is when brands think they have a really amazing ACoS, and it's because 90% of their sales are coming from brands. Curious what you think in those cases.
Yeah, I also think it matters like who is asking the question, because if it's someone selling sort of like a commoditized product and nobody actually knows who their brand is, they'd be lucky to spend more on their brand. Like they would love if more people knew who they were. So I think like for companies that have weak brand recognition, like you should be wishing that more people would be searching for your brand. So like, how do you do that? Well, you do a lot more brand defense type stuff. You do bid on your own brand. You do try to like invest a lot in branding. So I think in terms of people asking like, man, I'm spending so much on brand, that's a great problem to have, to be at a point where people actually know your brand and are searching it. If that's not the case, sometimes I'll see people, small account spending $5,000 a month and, $500 included their brand name. It's like, granted that's 10% of their budget, but I would say like, it's not worth the time, energy to rearrange your account in order to do that. On the other side of the spectrum, I've seen accounts where they had such crazy good branding that almost every single search included their brand name. Like people just knew them. They were super popular. I think they had like celebrities wearing their particular product, and like almost every search was branded. So like, what should they do? Should they turn off, 80% of their keywords because they were so heavy branded? So I think like finding the sweet spot there, and I think the way that you find the sweet spot is like, how much do we want to spend on, and what do we want our results to be on searches or that have our brand name in it? How much do we want to spend on targeting our own ASINs, and what do we want our return for that to be? So I think like taking that time to do some pre-planning where it's like, okay, I have a total ACoS of maybe 10%, but for my branded keywords, I only want to spend a tiny percentage of my overall sales, and I want the return on ad spend to be like 10x, 15x, something like that. And then all of my non-branded, I'm willing to go down to like 3, 4, 5x. And like, what does that do when I combine it all? How can I play with these numbers? So I think that's the way to think about it. And to answer your question, like, yeah, I think people should do it for sure.
Yeah. It sounds like just the overall pattern you're getting to is segmentation, like really getting granular, whether it's product level metrics or segmenting branded versus non-branded, really diving into making sure you're hitting the targets you want at that granular level.
For sure. I always say like, you want to be as granular and segmented as possible without it getting in the way of your day-to-day operations or your analysis of it. Because, theoretically you could have every single search term gets its own dedicated campaign, or like in a theoretical way, like every single product is its own campaign. Every single search term is in its own campaign. And you just have this gigantic hypothetical account where you have 200,000 campaigns, incredibly segmented, very difficult to manage. So finding that sweet spot is really important. Throw back to what was mentioned earlier, where it's like, that's how campaign structure, that's how strategy can get so sticky, because some people might be interested in branded, non-branded traffic. Other people are really concerned about profitability. Some people are concerned about growth, and like so many other factors come in where you don't necessarily want like a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah, for sure. So we're running just about out of time, and I wanted to ask one question. I know PPC is not your problem, but how about ranking organically?
Yeah.
Can we talk about that for just a second? So given your lengthy experience with advertising, what's the secret sauce today? And maybe you don't have one, but how do we rank organically on Amazon? Can we do it through advertising?
I just talked to someone and they're like, my ranking strategy is an exact match keyword, sponsored products with a very high top of search placement bid. And that was it. And so I think doing that is like a big step in the right direction, but I think there's a lot more that can be done. So I think an interesting way to visualize it is like, imagine like the CEO of the company is in a room with all of the Amazon growth people. Like there's a PPC person, there's a branding person, there's a copywriter, there's like the videographer, there's the product photography person, there's the data analyst, there's like the competitive research person, there's like organic person, so on and so forth. You have all these different people in the room going around that room and asking like, what should we be doing to rank higher? Every single person should have something to contribute, right? So like the data competitive research person should be like going and finding the easiest terms to rank for and then use that as a foothold to then go rank for more tricky keywords, right? That's pretty standard. I wouldn't say that's the job of like a PPC person. However, there's going to be some collaboration between those two fronts of like, PPC person, go do some research. Like, where do we think we can gain some traction here? Let's go bid on those footholds and like, let's go after those terms aggressively. And, there was a statistic this came from Amazon advertising, but they said, if you're running all three ad types, sponsored product, sponsored brand, sponsored display, if you're running all of them, you will reach the category average amount of reviews, category average, like monthly orders. You'll reach those averages a lot faster if you're running all of those ad types. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. One thing we started doing too is Google Ads to the Amazon listing as well. That just seems to give sort of a holistic lift. So yeah, it's a big answer, but like PPC, it has like one lane that connects to a lot of other departments. And anytime there could be like good collaboration between like, hey, someone spent 10 hours researching competitor keywords and like they spent so much time like looking at competitor rankings. And then like the PPC person spent some time doing that too. They can compare those things. And like, that's where I think a lot of the magic happens. Share it with a branding person, share it with a copywriter. All those things need to come together.
Yeah. There's no one easy answer, is there? It's a comprehensive, all-inclusive strategy.
Amen.
And I love Amazon's reports that always call out utilizing as much as their advertising as possible. I don't doubt what they say. I don't doubt what they say is true, but it does always seem to push advertising.
Yeah, I'd love to have my own data on that, like comparison of all clients that only are doing like sponsored brands and some sponsored display versus someone who's like going to the max with all three ad types. I'd be really curious to compare like those two cohorts of clients.
Well, can't wait to hear your episode on it.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us today, Mike. I want to give our listeners the opportunity to find you. So if you can share the best places to connect with you, reach out to you, where would that be?
Yeah, I think a lot of the Amazon crowd is on LinkedIn. So I spend some time on LinkedIn. It's my number one at work social media thing that we do. So yeah, LinkedIn, Michael Erickson Facchin. You can find me there at badger.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And I'm sure we will have you on the show again because Amazon advertising, it's always changing and there's always new lessons for us all to learn.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Thanks Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Common Mistakes. If you're not yet subscribed, be sure to follow us and visit envisionhorizons.com to sign up for our weekly newsletter with all the latest Amazon news and expert advice. For Amazon sellers looking for more support, check out our Amazon brand management platform, My Horizons, and sign up for a free trial. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you on the next episode of Common Mistakes.